Welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. Sit back, relax, stay sinful. Story number 1. This happened a few days ago. It was a cool spring morning in Vancouver, where I live, and I had an early morning. I left the house around 6 a.m. and began my walk to the SkyTrain. The neighborhood where I live is a dense pocket of mid-rise and high-rise residential buildings that are heavily tread along the wide streets, almost overgrown with greenery typical of the Pacific Northwest. The streets were quiet in the silvery morning light. I came upon a roundabout, also very typical of this neighborhood, where two of the quiet streets intersected. This was a more isolated area, as a few of the nearby buildings were in various stages of demo and renovation. The center of roundabout was a patch of garden, about 12 feet by 12 feet with tall grasses, tons of flowers and some shrubby type plants. There were some big orange poppies growing, and I wanted to have a look. As I stepped onto the edge of the garden, I began to check out the flowers. As I reached out to pick one of the flowers, I got this eerie feeling. There was a little too much movement in tall grasses. Maybe, I'm not sure, but whatever it was, made every hair on my body stand up. It was just so powerful that I instinctively jumped back from the edge of the garden. From the thick grass in the center, I heard a giggle. It was not a child. It was definitely an adult, and it sounded like they were putting on a very scary, shrill voice. I turned around and got out of there so fast. The giggle was quiet enough that I couldn't hear it by the time I was back on the sidewalk. I hightailed it down the street to the safety of the main road and looked over my shoulder several times. No movement from the roundabout, not a stir. Story number 2. Hey all, it's your family neighborhood Repo man. I begrudgingly earn a living repossessing bank collateral in the form of motor vehicles. As you can guess, most people I deal with are not happy to see me. For some background, I'm not your typical Repo man by looking at me. Most guys I work with are over 6'3", 200 to 300 pounds, bald with a beard. I know it sounds specific, but it really holds true in my experience. I, on the other hand, am 5'11" and 155 pounds, but I do have a beard. On to the story. I was out working during the day and checking a retail location for a vehicle I'd been searching for. The address I was checking was located in a large mall area. I glanced in my rearview mirror to see a Ford Focus behind me. He made a few of the same turns I did, but I didn't think twice about it. After the 7th or 8th turn that he had mimicked, I decided to pull into a parking spot. I figured he would either move on or come talk to me, if that was his goal. I noticed he was on the phone in my rear view. I parked the truck and watched the car as it parked about 50 feet from me. Okay, fine. I noticed the man driving the Focus was staring and pointing at me as he spoke on the phone, so I decided to ask what his deal was. When I approached, he got out of his vehicle, which was alarming. I backed off and didn't go any closer. I leaned my head out my open window and said, "Sir, is there a reason you were following me?" He moves his phone from his ear, covering the microphone, and yells, "Yes, you're harassing people on private property. Cops are on their way." I told him that was fine and I would wait around to speak to the police. He yelled some more unintelligible nonsense as I put my window up and sat pretty waiting for the police. A few minutes later, a cruiser shows up behind me. The officer approaches my window and we spoke about the situation. I told him that I'm permitted on private property unless I'm explicitly asked to leave by someone who owns the property or works security, which he agreed with. Long story short, the police told me I was good to go, and asked that I not engage as the man left. I complied and planned to move on with my day. About 20 minutes after all of this, I glanced in my rear view to see the same Focus driving a couple cars behind me, so I parked again out of frustration. I immediately exited my truck and lit a cigarette. The man driving his car screeched up beside me, exited his car without putting it in park. As his car begins to roll away, he is turned away from it, screaming at me about violating his right to privacy and harassing the public at his mall. I calmly told him that I was already cleared by the PD and that I was losing my patience. I told him he needed to leave right then before I called the police. It was at this point that his vehicle struck the concrete base of a light pole and stopped. He started screaming and saying I crashed his car. I told him I had a dash cam footage that would negate that claim. That's when he charged me. Now remember, I'm not a big man. I've dealt with plenty of confrontation at this job, and this guy did not appear coordinated at all. I stepped out of his path and guided him to the ground, telling him to stay down while I leave and to leave me alone. I got in my truck and left. Looking back, I absolutely should have called the police again, as I've gotten the officer's cell phone number and badge number. This story all comes to a head 2 nights later in a bizarre turn of events that genuinely scared me. At this point, I had just gotten married to my lovely wife, and we were living in our 1-bedroom apartment in a hip suburb of a major Midwest city. It was a Friday night, and I decided I would grab some beers for the wife and I to enjoy after a long week. As I was leaving the store with our beer, I saw a maroon Ford Focus in the parking lot, seemingly unoccupied. I made a mental note of the coincidence, given the bizarre ordeal of a couple days prior, but I didn't think much more of it. As I pulled into my apartment parking lot, the Focus pulled in behind me. I hadn't noticed it followed me until this point. I lived on the 3rd floor, so I decided I was going to hustle up the steps, just in case this was the same guy, and he had stalked me or something. My plan didn't work. He followed me to my patio where my wife was waiting, again unbeknownst to me. I was apparently not feeling very observant that night. That's when this motherfucker snuck up, crouching behind our small fence. Neither of us knew he was there until he said, still hidden from view, "Pretty girl." I snapped to my feet and began to look around when I spotted him. I knew instantly it was him. I immediately ordered my wife to go inside, lock the door, and call the police. When I approached him, he drew a small switchblade and pointed it at my belly. I began to back up with my hands up, saying something along the lines of, We don't have to do this, man. What do you want?" He told me he wanted me to call my wife outside. That wasn't going to happen. I'd rather be stabbed than expose her to this man, and I told him that. He lunged at me with his knife, grazing and cutting my side, as I attempted to grab and redirect his forearm. Then we went to the ground, where he lost his knife. I got some knees to connect to his head when the police lights became visible, and I heard shouting. Long story short, Buddy was arrested on site, and I provided the badge number and PD of the officer from work a couple days prior in order to collaborate my claims. I decided to press charges, and as far as I know, he's awaiting a court date. I'm not sure I have to be involved in it. Story number 3. I worked at a prison for 2 years. I worked in lockdown where people in regular population get put when acting up, when they get in fights, among other things. Rules in these situations are paramount to life and death. These guys don't care. That's why they end up in lockdown. I say all this to let you know I know procedure when dealing with inmates. My friend and I were on our way to an anime convention. I was excited enough and didn't think ahead enough to use the bathroom before my 4-hour drive. So about 2 hours in, I get the urge. We pull off on the first exit we see that has a gas station. I'm already dreading using this bathroom, as the station looks like crap. The parking lot was basically dirt and busted concrete. I get into the store and see an officer at the bathroom. He's letting inmates use the bathroom. Cut to me looking out the window of the store, seeing 3 vans full of inmates. So now I have to wait. I wait, and as they leave, I make my way back there to use the bathroom. I sit down and start my business. A moment passes and 3 inmates come into the bathroom. They see my legs, say shit, but shut the door. My mind starts racing. I've got my pants at my ankles. This bathroom has 1 stall, 1 urinal, and a sink. One immediately uses a urinal. Fine. One turns on the water. Fine. At this point, I'm fine. I understand. It's when I hear a cell phone that my heart drops. In no way, shape, or form are they allowed a cell phone. The air dryer comes on. Tell my girlfriend. I can't hear most of it. All I hear is a shuffling sound. I wipe as quick as possible, and then I get the hell out of there. I give the officer a mean eye, but I'm too flustered to think properly. My friend and I decide to leave. My afterthoughts on the story. They were chained with wrist and ankle cuffs with state coveralls. The officer wasn't a state officer, and if he wasn't from our state, he had a different uniform. I should have said something about the cell phone. Not at the time, of course, but after they were put back in the van. Story number 4. I worked as a cocktail waitress when I was 22. My shift was from 5 p.m. until 2 a.m. As a waitress, I'd become used to being harassed. Usually it wasn't anything too over the top or frightening. Most customers were regulars who flirted innocently. Just good-natured banter. Nothing threatening or in any way sinister. Up until this night. I never felt a sense of danger from any of the customers I'd waited on. On this particular night, though, everything changed. I was being harassed by a creepy customer I'd never seen before. He'd said such inappropriate things to me that crept me out. He was relentless with his inappropriate remarks. At one point, I was serving him his drink. He reached out and put his hand on my ass. After this happened, I never went back to his table again. If he wanted another drink, he'd have to go up to the bar and ask the bartender. I was through with waiting on this sinister creep. This happened back in 1978, so it was the time when I didn't have any recourse when things like this happened. The bartender only made customers leave when they were far too drunk to sit on a bar stool or at a table or booth. Otherwise, we were on our own to deal with creepy customers. At closing, he finally left. Even though he was gone, I still felt such a sense of unease. I wasn't easily spooked, but this guy had really freaked me out. There was just something off about him. It took me nearly an hour after closing to complete the work and cleaning that I had to do to have the bar ready for the following day. It was 3 a.m. as I made my way through the parking lot to get to my car. It was a very deserted and isolated place at night. The parking lot had woods that surrounded it. That and in of itself was creepy. But as I was halfway to my car, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. My heart began to pound as I realized that he was waiting in the lot for me to come out. I knew I had to get to the safety of my car, or this man was going to do God knows what to me. I was young and fit, whereas this man was in his late 40s and overweight. My thoughts were quickly assessing my situation. I didn't want to be kidnapped or murdered. That was the scenario I envisioned, if this man got to me before I could get into my car. I knew I'd have to make a run for it. I'd have to run as fast as possible. I jumped inside the car and locked the door. It wasn't one moment too soon because this man was now at my driver's side window, demanding me to roll it down. He kept yelling that he didn't want to hurt me. He only wanted to talk. He began to pound on the window as I fumbled with my keys to try to get the hell out of there. I began to fear that he'd shatter my window and get his hands on me. Finally, I got my car started, and as I put the car in reverse and backed out, he began to scream bloody murder. He was yelling for me to stop because I'd run over his foot. My gut instinct told me that this man was faking an injury to get out of my car. I was not going to get out of that car for any reason. I drove home as fast as I could. Once home, I called the police. They came to take my report and get my description of the guy. At this point, I wasn't certain about whether I had injured him or not. I explained all of this to the police officer. The police sent another officer to the parking lot to see if he was still there and suffering from an injury. There was no one there. Nobody called the police to report a hit and run either. The police told me that I'd done the right thing by not falling for his ruse. I called my boss the following day and told him that I wouldn't be returning to work. I'd never been so frightened by anyone before. It was a night in which I truly feared for my life. There was no way I could make myself return to the job. That night still haunts my dreams. Thank you guys for listening. Please be sure to leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe for future content. I want to thank you guys who have subscribed recently. I appreciate all the supportive and loving comments that you throw my way. It makes this so much more rewarding. I hope everyone had a great week. And be sure to email any true scary stories of your own to thesinfulsavant@gmail.com. I'll include my email address in the description box below as usual. Till we meet again, stay sinful.